Tangent. I'm Robert Gibson, alias Zendexor, and my teammates are Nikita Zuev, Anthony Simeone, and XJ. Today's discussion will focus on the classic space vampire tale Asylum, which first appeared in Astounding Science Fiction, May 1942. The author, E van Vogt, exemplifies the hectic, hallucinatory end of the spectrum of Golden Age science fiction, just as Heinlein exemplifies the saner and more rational end. A good Van Vogt story is like an unforgettable fever dream, and the greatest mistake a critic can make is to try too hard to make sense of it. Whatever coherence it possesses must operate on a deeper level than ordinary cause and effect, and I suspect that this dreamlike aspect makes the tale more immune to spoilers than most, so here goes. Imagine about 1 million years ago, a particularly unfortunate group of galactic holidaymakers coming under the influence of the peculiar radiation of the Dreegh Sun. Its baneful effects cause them to need a continuous transfusion of blood and life force in order to stay alive. The Galactic Government helps them for a while, but eventually decides, as it were, to pull the plug on them. The involuntarily vampiric Dreeghs refuse to die. They escape, and from then on they prey on people for 1 million years, until finally they choose to settle in a solar system so backward that its inhabitants know nothing about the galactic civilization around them, namely the one in which we live. Here the narrative begins. In some of the story's 9 chapters, we are given the Dreegh's viewpoint. In others, that of the human protagonist, a reporter, William Lee, who begins by investigating what seem completely mysterious atrocities and ends by learning the truth about the Dreeghs and about the trap set for them by the galactic authorities, a trap in which he himself turns out to have a key part to play. In fact, William Lee is not what he thinks he is. Just as Earthlings are outclassed by the vibrant power of the Dreeghs, and Van Vogt is brilliant at evoking a sense of helplessness in their terrifying presence, so the Dreeghs themselves are outclassed by the Galactics, the chief of whom have IQs of 1200 or so. I reckon I'd need a similar IQ in order to grasp the ins and outs of the last 3 chapters of the story, but as I'm not quite in that league, I just enjoy it for the ride. And I'll pass the comments now to my colleagues who would like to accept the challenge first. Comrade Zuef?
Well, first on the line, I have my own difficulties with the story. That I have been grasping at for quite a while now, right? I've been really thinking about what makes this story work in some aspects and what doesn't make it work in others. First of all, the good bits. I really enjoy the beginning. You know, the way the prose takes it, the mystery behind the situation, the scene of the murder is interestingly showcased. The backdrop of the story is also interesting. You know, it's this alternative of history where, you know, no more crimes exists because of chemical imbalances that have been fixed by some sort of a serum and so on and so forth. But overall, you know, well written and interesting to follow if you're not really thinking about it. However, here are my 2 biggest issues with the tale. Number one, it suffers from what I like to call the convenience loop. So, we are all authors. We all understand that whenever a protagonist is within a story, the reason we're following them is because they're interesting. So we are okay with looking at some of coincidences that will happen in the story for the story to start or for something to happen in the story to make it continue. And readers as well would be okay with a certain amount of convenience happening within the tale. But Asylum is like every plot point that's really important is based on a convenience, right? So these guys decide to mess with this reporter and make him the assassin for the galactic interpreter or whatever the real name was. And it turns out to be that no, like he is actually the galactic interpreter that they've been trying to kill this entire time.
Observer,
Yes,
I think. Galactic
whatever.
Observer.
Uh, where was I?
The
Yes,
convenience.
Coincidence.
convenience.
Yeah.
Yeah, coincidence and convenience, contrivances. The triple C is all full on display in Asylum, and it is not hidden by anything. Like, it's so blatant that it took me out of the story several times. That was my one problem. And then my second problem was just the fact that just like there have been like these repeated coincidences that happened within the tale, the other problem that I felt was that the protagonist was in constant danger like 4 times before we even got to half of the story. And because he was in constant danger, none of the dangers afterwards seemed like anything, because he walked out of every single terrible situation out alive without a single problem, which made me feel like, well, we're gonna be in all these constant dangers, and none of them are gonna mean anything because we have just seen them being resolved like without any issue. So both of those situations have really hampered my enjoyment of Asylum. And as much as I love the concept and the IQ, like subplot and vampires out of space that suck out energy and stuff, as much as I love all of those concepts, that's kind of it. I love the concepts in the story, but the story itself did not impress me in any way, shape, or form, unfortunately. Right. After that, very praising review, let's hear what actually has to say. Another ray of sunshine, as I'm sure.
It's like my first time smoking weed.
Okay, hold on. All right, this is an interesting discovery. Go on.
Yeah.
What was it like?
I had a horrible reaction to in my first time smoking weed. Like I wasn't high or anything. I didn't get high. I just got really, really dizzy. Like the room is just spinning around me, but I was in complete control of my consciousness. Like I wasn't hallucinating anything. I wasn't feeling like everything is funny or anything.
You were just feeling like sick.
Sick, like car sick, just like very bad car sick. And
Okay.
and I think like smoking weed is weed just hits different people differently. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that, and this story didn't really quite hit me in a positive way. Like I think like I almost feel like that the title of the Stanley Kubrick movie, like if you're reading the story, you need to learn to stop worrying and enjoy the bomb. You absolutely have to do that. If you're the type of reader that goes for plot, that goes for characterization, even I I feel like all the characters in the stories are like cardboard. They are like
I feel like you're about to just say, if you're a reader, you may not enjoy this, because you're just naming everything that a reader would enjoy. No, carry on.
well, I mean, like if you're just there to take in the sights, you know, then it's a pretty, it's like a theme park ride, you know. You just go through all these different things, and then you just go like, oh, cool, nice. Then I suppose there is some enjoyment to be had, because like Nikki said, some of the concepts are quite interesting. I feel like the IQ thing is a bit I don't think the author actually understands IQ all that well. But then again, it's in keeping with the rest of Van Vogt's stories, where if you're looking to make sense of the story, it's not going to really work. Yeah, and I find I can't really. I'm just not the demographic for this kind of story, I have to say. Just like weed doesn't sit well with me.
You're really milking this metaphor, actually.
Well, yeah. So I find myself at a loss to really critique the story. And so I fall down to this really nitpicky thing, and I cannot stand how many times the word actually is actually repeated actually in this
The actual
story. Unbelievable, man. I'm like, good God, did this thing go through an editor? Yeah, I can't say I enjoy the story, but I want to be a bit generous. I want to extend a hand of generosity and say that perhaps the story is just not meant for people like me. So, over to you, Anthony. What do you think?
I would before
What?
Anthony
Yeah.
goes, I'd just like to add that I don't think it's intended for people. That's why we did. Anyway, carry on, Anthony. What
Wow, harsh. Woo. No, but what do you mean people like you? Before XJ, before I start, what does that mean, people like you? What does that mean to you when you say that? It's not intended for people like you.
I have a very structured mind. Like things must logically flow, and so if there are too many plot holes in a story, I cannot enjoy it because it takes me out of it. I'll be thinking like, you know, the example I always use is Pacific Rim. In the very first movie, they have a bunch of airlifters that lift the robots all the way into the ocean, and they drop the robot with their legs down, slamming into the ocean. And that scene took me out of the story completely because I can't stop thinking you dropping the robots like that into the ocean is going to just crush the legs, because actually the surface of the ocean has something called the capillary force, and that's why ships can float on water surface. You drop something that heavy from that height into the water is just going to destroy the legs. So things like that.
So are you a hard sci-fi kind of guy then? I mean, is that
I like hard science fiction. I have the pretensions of being a hard science fiction lover. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
May I contradict XJ based on what he's talking about, even though it is his own perception. From my observations, I feel like if Pacific Rim in that moment, 10 minutes before the drop happened, if the movie said, okay, so water on Earth has started behaving differently, and they would scientifically explain why this would be okay, actually would be on board. Is if it makes sense within the universe,
Fair
actually
enough.
is gonna buy it.
That's fair enough. But But
Okay.
I do enjoy hard science fiction to stories to answer Anthony's question.
Mm, mm.
Stephen Baxter.
Oh yeah.
I really like his story. It is very very hard science.
Yeah, he's the hardest of the hard. Like,
Yeah,
to put
like
it one way these days, yeah. Stephen Baxter.
Isaac Asimov is pretty soft compared to him.
Right. I feel like
Yeah.
all of you are trying to talk about anything else but the story.
I'll get
So,
into it.
Anthony, what did
No,
you think
I have some
about?
thoughts. I'll get us
Okay.
refocused. I'll get us refocused if you want, if I may
Yeah,
jump
yeah,
in.
please.
This is definitely the softest of soft science fiction. And again, I find myself, I think I said in an episode or two ago, where I was jealous of the early 20th century writers where you could do the info dump with impunity. And I think again that was the medium is the message. I think it was the medium of these pulp magazines where they had to do that quickly. This is a 20,000 word novella, basically. So, but I also envy their ability to the freedom they had to do what you can't do anymore. Everybody hates the info dump now, and everybody also hates the adverb, which there was a lot of adverbs in this. There was a lot of too many adverbs. Some of his description was see this story was very conflicting for me. Sometimes I found myself lost and mesmerized by the description and the description of approaching Jupiter and where this scientist lives out in space, and just the description there. But then, I really had to think and keep myself cognizant of the time period in which this was written, the audience for which it was written. So it's again, I feel like I'm picturing like teenage boys, reading these astounding pulp fiction sort of stories where it's like you need you're hit over the head with your all the emotions of the person inside of them are on display, so he's describing them in very purple prose, and the descriptions are very robust and very purple, but then I had the feeling I was watching like a 1940s film because it was like, put down the gun, like fun, I will. It was just like the lines are corny, the dialogue's corny,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
fun, I will, or like, hey, listen, broad, or, hey, listen, dame. It was very kind of like 1940s gangster film language at some points. So I'm like, it's kind of taking me out of it. Then there was the purple prose, too many adverbs, but then it came to the concepts. And it was, yes, these characters are thin, but it was like the characters, I think, for a lot of these stories were window dressing for the science fiction stories back in the day, were window dressing for these concepts. The space vampire thing, which I've had a fascination with space vampires since that one episode of Buck Rogers, the 70s, 80s Buck Rogers with that was my favorite episode with the Vorvon, with the space vampire. Freaked me out as a kid. Early 80s, I was like, under 10 years old, and I'm watching that and it freaked me the heck out. Um, and then there was that movie, The Space Vampires, which I think was an Italian movie, had a different name, but then it was when it was dubbed in English, it was The Space Vampires. So that whole concept of the space vampire, and then there was that movie Life Force in the 80s, which I think was based off of this, like draining the life force of people, these space vampires. So that legacy kind of echoed through time, and I liked that. And I liked, it was weird. But then it was like the time period where he's calling people perverts. There hadn't been crime or a murder, rather, in 27 years because we had used this machine psychologist to root out the perverts. And I'm like, okay, what does that mean? Right. So it's like the time period and the intolerance of the time period kind of crept in. So it was just reading the story was this highs and lows of like, ew, I don't like the way he's describing things. It's too purple. What does he mean by perverts? The language is like a 1940s, like, yeah, she, like, it was kind of like that. But then at the same time, it's like appreciating the
Yeah.
roots of science fiction and seeing where this seminal stuff came from. So I feel like reading these older stories is like an exercise in you're a science fiction fan, go back and appreciate your roots and the roots of the genre. And it's like, okay, and it's like a duty. You have to go back and read these old stories. Like, okay, I got through this story and I can see where this stuff came from, but it was so lodged in the time it was written And the one thing I want to echo with what Nikki said with the conveniences and the coincidences, again, is that what the genre suffered from, back in the day, where they had to kind of just like, oh, we got to get the story rolling. Yeah, there's a couple contrivances to get there, but I don't know. So very kind of polarizing story in my mind, and I think for us in general, it seems like so far. So
I mean,
that's kind of where I'm at.
I don't know, man, because there are some really old science fiction in quotation marks that from like really early in the period that actually doesn't suffer from the issues in this, and I'm thinking specifically of Out of the Silent Planet by C.S. Lewis.
Okay.
That is,
I mean, even Desertion. We looked at Desertion.
Yeah.
It doesn't have all these.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, go on.
exactly. It's like I think Van Vogt is in a separate space of his own. It's definitely carved out a style for himself.
Well, get me
Yeah.
out of this corner, please.
Yeah, I
We-
mean,
we-
concepts
we-
good.
We read another Van Vogt story, didn't we? About the destruction of
Monster.
Monster, yes.
Mm.
And I found
Okay.
Monster to be more palatable than Asylum. I don't know.
It was a readable story, yes.
Yeah, it was much more readable. Yeah, so I'm not sure what's going on with Asylum, to be quite honest.
All right, I think this is the moment that both we and the viewers have been waiting for. Everyone else have said what they had the piece, what they thought of, and how their initial feelings were regarding this. So I only have one question to you, not even like whether you like the story or not, Robert, but like why did you do this to us? No, but really, Robert,
Robert,
what do
take
you,
it
what do you
away.
think about
Why
it?
did you do
What do
this
you
to
think
us?
about Asylum?
All right. Well, I think the key aspect of this is that although I'm the oldest member of the team, I'm mentally the youngest by quite a long way. I actually preempted the objections which XJ and Nikki made. I preempted them in my introduction. I did warn
You did.
everybody that Van Vogt is not to be judged by logical standards because his gift is a sort of hallucinatory one. And if there's a logic behind it, it's the logic of dream, not the logic of real life. But on the other hand, dreams do exist. So, in a way, the distinction between dreams and real life is an unreal one. I think that XJ mentioned the repetition of actually. Now, that is completely accurate. I saw what he meant as soon as he pointed it out that there are far too many actualities. The interesting thing for me is since I'm a keen critic of style, why didn't I spot this? And the answer, the interesting answer, interesting to me, that is that I was bamboozled by the author. Now, I think that it's the author's job to bamboozle his readers if he possibly can. The bigger the bamboozler, the greater the author. And that's why I think Van Vogt is really great. As far as I'm concerned, he can fool me into thinking that his story is making sense when it isn't. And so I take my hat off to him. I think that to be slightly more down to earth in my criticisms, I think some of the points I've heard. Well, I'll take one that Nikki made, that William Lee keeps escaping and making it seem like too easy that he's escaping from danger. I actually don't think the story is saying that. I think the story makes it clear that he just thinks he's escaped, and that in effect he hasn't. Of course, ultimately, the reason he's not in so much danger is because he's the galactic official himself. He's a Superman that puts the actual space vampires in the shade as far as power is concerned. But that's just the final explanation. On the way there, he thinks he's in danger at several points and he gets out of it, but it's like a nightmare in which you think you've escaped and in fact you haven't. I thought that came off rather well in the story. Anyway, to sum up my attitude, I was very impressed with the story when I first read it, and I haven't read it that often, but I've read it a few times during the course of my life, with long enough intervals to forget some of the details. And I must say, I don't think it's. I'm not a jaded reader as far as Van Vogt's stories are concerned. He wrote two very good collections, and this one is in one of them, Away and Beyond. The other one is Destination Universe, and they both have stories from his golden period. Later on, he went downhill a lot. Anyway, that's
Yeah,
to say.
I remember his career starting really, really, brightly. What was it? The Black Destroyer,
Black
or
Destroyer,
Black
yes.
Destroyer was his first story in 1939, I believe.
Yeah.
Um, and that was a really good tale and really jump started his career. But then I saw that basically most of the reviews of stuff that he did in the 60s and early 70s was not that much appreciated by the critics of the
No.
time.
So you've read Black Destroyer, have you, Nikki?
Yes, I have read Black Destroyer. It was one of the stories that was taught to us in my literature class in Russia.
Right.
That is interesting. I had a science fiction story for literature class too. It was
Oh yeah, what was
yeah,
it?
yeah. I'm struggling to remember the name, and I am ashamed that I have to try to remember the name. It was a John Wyndham novel.
Well, there aren't that many of those.
Yeah, I cannot remember the name, but I can remember one character in it, and Robert will tell me which book it is. Joseph Strom. Strom. Joseph Strom.
Oh, I don't know any Joseph
Really?
Strom.
It's let me try to describe the story. This is set in the far future where it is implied that Earth had been through a nuclear holocaust, and then the inhabitants were very strictly religious, and they protect the purity of the human species by weeding out anybody with any sort of genetic mutation. So
Wait, you mean the chrysalids?
the chrysalids, I guess.
Yeah.
So. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So the protagonist, well, the narrator actually is a telepath.
Yeah.
The chrysalids. Yeah.
Yeah. When you said Earth was destroyed, I thought you meant it had blown up, as in times to rest.
No. Nuclear holocaust. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. I like that some literature class actually does science fiction and not boring old Shakespeare all the time.
I mean, Shakespeare is fun if you're like
I
actually
hate
if
Merchant of Venice. Let's put it that way.
I mean that's the worst one that he has ever done. To be honest, my favorite one.
That's what we did in literature class.
We did Macbeth and Romeo and Juliet, but I always wanted to do Titus Andronicus, I think it's called in English.
Oh God, Titus.
That's one
Man,
of
that
huh?
That's pretty brutal.
that's my favorite play of Shakespeare. It's just so ridiculous. It goes into, it goes from like, oh yeah, we're just gonna kill some people to like babes being thrown out of windows. It's just crazy. It's an absolute mess of a story. And every time there's a turn, you're like, ah man, it can't get any worse. And then there's just more bloody violence. It's very fun.
But going back to Asylum.
Oh, do we have to? Okay.
Yeah. Well, I was actually thinking about what Anthony said, and I think I agree with him in that if you younger. And in a way, I think Robert also said that if you're a younger person, Asylum would be much more enjoyable. I think if you
That's why I
think
enjoy it.
less.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to ask Robert how young he was when he first read this, and how many times has he read it over? I don't know. I always talk about like the young boys, back in the day reading this. Were you one of those, back in the
Probably
day, like reading
my
this in some,
edition is
again, this was published in 1942.
yeah.
Um,
This
so
is
unless you're,
reprinted 1968, which was when I was 14. So I probably
okay.
read it around about then.
So you probably would have been, when the first time you read it, probably a young teenager. So yeah, it's also interesting to revisit over the course of your life these stories like this again and again and see how you respond to it over time. But yeah, I mean, I guess the furthest I can go back with science fiction is like the 50s. Like Asimov, I can kind of take Asimov. When I read Foundation, I remember having like a lesser version of this kind of, oh man, the stilted language and everything, So I think I can't go back to, like, who was the guy who wrote the Lensman stories?
Smith,
Yeah,
Doc Smith.
Doc Smith. Yeah, Doc E. Smith or whatever. Yeah, and was that from the 30s, 40s, I think, or earlier? That was like the same time period, right? That, or 30s, 40s, I think those stories were written, if I'm wrong.
Well,
I don't know,
now
but anyway,
Smith is a strange case, actually. He
okay.
could commit really grave stylistic offences. He could give you huge info dumps that are really indigestible. But when he got going, he could write in a really feverish sort of extravagant way, which was the opposite of dry. It was like a torrent of
Hmm.
excitable prose. So
Yeah,
strange writer, but very effective. I think at his best, he was
yeah.
very effective.
I think I read one of the stories in that series. And again, I mean, I feel like if I'm reading stuff before Asimov, or before some of the 1950s sci-fi, I think that's where it kind of drops off for me. And it seems like it does the same for XJ and Nikki. I'm just like, I don't know. It's just, there's,
I wouldn't
there's
say I wouldn't
only
say
so,
dr- I wouldn't say drops
okay.
off for me. There's plenty of authors and plenty of stories
Okay.
back in those times that did not have
Okay.
to fall into any of these things. Uh,
Okay.
I think the reason this story suffers all these issues and they become so glaring is because the author was incapable of drawing me into his feverish dream. There's a really good story that we reviewed that had a similar effect on me that Robert desired for us to have and what he experienced when he's reading it, and that's Martian Odyssey. I want to say, and Martian Odyssey is Fever Dream 2.0. It's like every five sentences, some crazy new twist is introduced into the story, some new life form, some strange happenstance on Mars. That's impossible. Just like a lot of the talk about the intellect and the IQ within the story, or the motivations of the vampires and so on and so forth. But in Martian's Odyssey, the prose is at such high level, and the what's it called? The plot development is is constant. It's a constant journey. There isn't any stoppage. Here in the story of Asylum, there's way like for it to be like a hippie weed fever dream, right? Like where you're just like, oh,
Hey,
I'm out of space.
that's my metaphor.
Well, I'm stealing it. So, but yeah, to like if we to compare it to the idea that XJ was talking about, there's way too many stops, man. There's way too many like, whoa, give me a moment of consideration and really think about the situation from an analytical point of view. This story needs like 10, 15 pages less and a lot less inner contemplation for it to be the fever dream, right? Because it's just the concepts are not coming fast enough. The situations aren't changing fast enough. The prose
What?
isn't fast enough.
I feel like it's changing way too fast.
I don't think so at all.
Hence my nauseating metaphor. Really, it was my head was spinning. I was like, "What is going on here?"
Okay, maybe the scenery is changing. I'll give you that, XJ. But the situation isn't. The guy is a prisoner. Then the guy is a prisoner. The guy is a prisoner.
Danger.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Not only is he constantly in danger, but he's constantly in the same type of danger. Oh man, these vampires are really gonna do something to me if I don't do what they told me to do. Oh, I disobey them anyway. I get to live. Oh my God, it's gonna keep happening. Like, oh okay, all right. Any other plot points we got going here? Like, they could have been running across 60 different countries. And it would still be for me at a snail's pace because the actual story isn't changing.
Yeah,
There
I
you
guess
go.
it was a lot of him contemplating his situation.
Yeah.
Like,
To say the
how am I
least,
gonna get
yeah.
out of this one? And then he would, and it was really
Oh, I'm in a real
anticlimactic.
jiffy now. I disobeyed the vampires for the 60th time.
Right. And then 23 skidoo. Like, let's go. Like, it was just like, yeah, I know. It was just on to the next scene. Yeah, it's really kind of like, you're right. I mean, now I'm really going back and thinking of some of the contrivances and just like, and it was such a Deus ex machina and the kind of like, oh, he's really a super genius, spoiler alert, but we're well past the spoiler alert, right?
Yeah, we're way
But it's
past
just
the
like, oh,
spoilers.
he's really a super genius. And it was just like, again, the whole fixation on IQ seemed very early 20th century, bordering on eugenics kind of time period, where I'm like, uh, okay. Like, I don't know. It was just really that whole thing with oh, well, you couldn't possibly comprehend because you're just an earthling and you have an IQ of 112. And it was like
which
IQs
is
increased
which
by
is pretty high, by the way. 112 is pretty high.
right, but not compared to 400 for the Dreeghs and
Yeah.
whatever
But
200 for the clubs. And it's like, oh, and
Actually,
list and then
actually, I have a question just occurred to me. When did I would call it a technology, really. When did the technology for IQ first come into being? Is it around the same period when this was written?
I think it was early 20th century, like maybe a few decades beforehand. But like the 20s,
It
maybe it kind of came into real vogue. And like,
it
I'm not sure
gives
exactly when the concept was invented, but
because it really gives me the same feeling as the case of the Golden Lily, where the fixation on electricity, as a magic source.
well, that author was an electrical engineer. So maybe we just don't understand electricity like he did.
Maybe.
mm,
So that
Uh,
may
but
be
yeah,
it does struck it well in Van Vogt's story, this short story anyway, Asylum. It does give me the sense that there is a fascination about this particular scientific topic being examined, shall we say, and it's in its early infancy stages, and therefore people have strange notions about it. Exactly like when nuclear power came into the scene, and then everyone has like a really strange idea of radiation, and then we get things like Fallout, where you can mutate into different creatures. Actually, I would say X-Men is also probably a misunderstanding of the theory of evolution as well, things like that.
yeah, any scientific concept that comes into vogue has inevitable science fiction, the science fiction will pick it up and run with it. like I'm a huge fan of cyberpunk as a genre, a subgenre of sci-fi, and yeah, you can definitely see about how the advancement of personal computing and everything got inspired. Took it to the next level of projecting consciousness into computers, and the merging of man and machines. So yeah, I guess it was a concept picked up at the time, and I guess it's shorthand for intelligence at the time. And I guess a kid reading at that time would know, like, oh, right, the IQ. I'm sure they were being tested for IQ in schools, like, but yeah, so it's a kind of, again, a retrograde sort of kind of concept. But I mean, for how much we've read things like how retrograde are some of the authors from the early 20th century, like, Lovecraft, love him or hate him. It's, he was steeped in that sort of like, sort of racial bias in the worst kind of way. So, and like just IQ ties into that whole kind of negative, ideology from back then. So that kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. Really go, here we go, IQ, something we're still fighting today, to dismiss and debunk, but it still creeps back in the conversation. But anyway, but yes, but yeah, so that's, I don't know. This story is really kind of polarizing, and I'm just like, I don't know. Again,
Well,
I appreciate it taps into like I'm not as steeped in this time period and stories from this time period as you all seem to be. So I'm just like, it's just that if there's a better author, more skilled writer, so maybe Van Vogt was kind of like maybe not as skilled as a writer, but he had imagination and concepts that he wanted to kind of get out. And he's early enough in the genre to kind of establish a foothold and like, I thought of this and I thought of that. So does he skate through on his ideas and the fever dream style of his writing? I don't know. It seems
You
like
could.
it.
There's a story that we reviewed. It's called The Ghoul and the Corpse. And it has a at least I feel like the author of that story and Van Vogt have very similar um, language when it comes to writing. They both use a lot of these colloquial wordings for their characters in order to characterize what kind of people they are in the moment, right? Like so, like hey dame, and so on and so forth. And Ghoul and the Corpse. I think Anthony, if you read it, it's like only 7 pages or something. You will see that even though somebody could have the same writing style as Vogt and wrote even earlier, that it's actually readable. You know. As far as this story is concerned, why is it called Asylum? Can someone tell me what's the reason it's called Asylum? Is this Skull in the Stars 2.0? Like I really don't get it. Who's Asylum from whom? What's happening?
Well,
I guess the Earth is the asylum, right?
Mm.
I was thinking like the Earth is an asylum, sort of like an asylum where
But no one's
I guess
accepting them, so it's like a threatened asylum. Like it's not really asylum if you go to someone's like I don't know diplomacy center and you say, "All right, I have 20 nuclear weapons. Let me
right.
in."
can
But
you can you
asylum
elucidate
can
for
be,
us at some point, Robert?
yeah, I
No,
mean, but asylum can be two things. It can be a place where you put the insane, or a place of safety, right? But I was struggling as to which one it was. Maybe it was both. The Earth is an asylum in
I
both
feel like
ways,
I
right?
need to be put into asylum after reading this. But yeah, Robert, what do you
Robert,
think? What
I think
yeah, what
Anthony's got it. It's a place of safety, or what they thought was going to be safety, but they didn't realize it
hmm.
was a trap.
but the vampires, yeah.
Hmm.
Well, I do have a question for Robert. Is this one of Van Vogt's stories where he started going downhill, or is this an example of his better
Well,
stories?
it's an example of what he wrote during his best period. I know
Oh.
you don't like it, but um, I personally, well, they're not all good that he wrote in this period, but they're all very colourful and memorable,
Ah,
dramatic, mysterious. So if somebody suddenly said, "Oh, there's an undiscovered collection by Van Vogt that's of the same period as Away and Beyond or Destination Universe," I would be pretty excited.
hmm. Well, yeah, it's true that I don't really like the story, but I also recognize that there are certain times when I recognize I'm simply not the demographic this story is aiming for.
Yeah,
Well,
it's like a great example I think from the podcast's past is Two Kinds of Fool. When I brought Two Kinds of Fool onto the table, right? We all looked at it, you know, and I had my exciting 12-year-old eyes like, isn't this awesome? And the two of you were like,
A little
there's a
bit
lot
too
of
much.
violence.
A
Yeah,
little bit too
there's a
much,
lot of
bro.
violence. Don't you think? You know, and I'm like, yes, that's right. And you're like, yeah, and I'm like, yeah, right. So I'm saying that's awesome, and you're like, it's a bit too much, right? Like it's a bit too much ketchup here, and I'm like, do you guys have any more ketchup? Like, you know, so
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just a difference of perspective, right?
Yeah, I think this short story is definitely aimed at a different kind of person than I am.
Yeah.
I wish I could enjoy it, but I think like I would have to take some sort of enhancing
Like weed.
thing that would like, for example, that would, you know, lift the story up from the bounds of its fever dreamness and really elevate it. Unfortunately, that was not the case for this time.
I mean, again, I'm very ambivalent. I enjoyed parts of it, the description, the craft of it, but again, as a writer, you're kind of going in like, okay, I'm going to look at this from a writer's standpoint, but as a sheer just reading enjoyment, yeah, I wouldn't say this was an enjoyable from a reader's standpoint. Yeah, again,
My very bold suggestion to Van Vogt, if he should be hearing me, is to rename this from Asylum to Actually.
So actually,
actually,
or what's it called? Oh no, I'm in danger.
attack of
Right.
the adverbs.
Attack of
Attack of the adverbs.
All right. I think unnecessarily so. We're being extra harsh to Asylum at this point.
maybe.
I will.
Yeah.
I will say this. Maybe we could discuss something that is to do with the story, but something that we could be positive about, and that's concepts. Because all of us agree on one thing: some of the concepts in this are really fun. For example, I think this is one of the first times that I've seen in earlier science fiction where there's the idea of a huge galactic government or like a galactic collective that is regulating stuff. That's something that
wasn't that the same idea he played on in Monster?
correct, but Monster's written later,
Okay.
from
fair
what I
enough.
remember. But yes, correct. Another concept that I thought was quite interesting to see in this time period is the idea of a vampire but in space. Unfortunately, though, I don't think the story does enough with the idea of vampire in space. It just throws it in there as a concept. Just like it does with the previous thing I mentioned. With the previous thing, right, like the galactic conglomerate, that is supposed to be background. That is supposed to be like, ooh, I get to wonder what other stars, what other creatures could be there. But when your story is about vampires, I feel too little spent on how vampire these vampires are. You know?
I actually disagree with you there. I think
Okay.
the description of the vampires are not they do. I think he did go into some fairly detailed description of how the vampires are, except that he didn't actually just tell you what they are. It's just leaked through the dialogue and the interaction between Lee and everyone else, right? The problem is that his vampires is very much Bram Stoker's vampire.
Right. You say that they don't have something different to
Yeah.
make them interesting, to make them
Well,
pop.
He did describe them. He did describe the vampires in true showing and not telling. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Now, Stoker's vampires are clearly supernatural. They can't. They can change into other forms, and they can't go out in the daytime.
Well,
Whereas,
what I meant is that because the concept of vampires that Bram Stoker had crafted for us is this very magnetic creature who seduces people in the dark, and that is exactly what these vampires are like. They're dangerous, they're seductive, they're magnetic, they're very highly intelligent, very powerful, and the other things like the other things like undead and supernatural and all that stuff. That is a setting thing. I don't know if I'm describing it properly, because you can go across multiple different types of writer universes, and vampires will tend to have that characteristic of being skulking shadows in the dark with very magnetic personality, extremely dangerous, and predator on life force.
Well, it goes with the job.
Yeah, it's weird. These vampires, it's interesting. I don't know why they needed blood and
See, this
life
just
force.
sounds so like this is a moment where the cultural difference between us is really on the show, because like there's like thousands of types of vampires in Slavic lore. Some of them are horrible, disgusting creatures that are more like what you would describe a ghoul or a gargoyle. Another one of them are these mesmerizing, beautiful maidens or
Yes,
males.
I very much
that-
enjoyed The Witcher. Yeah.
One concept I really feel like I
yeah,
wanted Van Vogt.
and so, you know what? I love Chinese history too, like Journey to the West. All right.
The original monster of the week.
One thing I felt like he really neglected was the idea that there had been no murder for 27 years because of this mechanical psychiatrist, right? That's what it was, right? It was the mechanical psychiatrist that like you could talk to a computer, it would hypnotize you and make you passive. I don't know. I really was like, whoa, let's go somewhere with this, because I feel like was that picked up by Philip K. Dick years later and lampooned by maybe for the Minority Report, where it was like you had pre-crime,
that was actually the exact same thought I had when I came to that.
like pre-crime.
There were a lot of things actually that I was thinking that you also mentioned. Which the other thing was the adverbs. I was like, man, if Van Vogt had stopped using a little bit of adverbs here, that would be great.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm like, okay. So the concept of that, I'm like, okay, no murder, but again, it was colored by like, okay, who does he consider perverts, right? He kept using that word. I'm like, but it was just like, let's explore that a little more. And he kind of just like brushed right over that. And I'm like, well, what is this? Okay, well, how does it what does it do to people? How does it solve, just you're talking to a computer and it fixes your mind. We in the 21st century, we know that's not the case. We know having a computer doesn't, you don't want to get therapy from the computers today.
I feel like the one really great thing about this short story is that any one of these concepts he threw out could be taken and really explored. So the mechanical psychiatrist thing is one. The other one that I'm thinking of is how the doors can just open into another place, like what's the name of I keep thinking Continental, but not John Wick. We're not in the same. Constantine. That the dining room, right? That was like this door in private room 3. You open it up and then you go straight into the Dreeghs starship, and then later on, it's a little bit like Alice in Wonderland, man. You open a door, you go into a vastly different place, and that is a concept on its own that you could just take and just like really run off with it.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like we've seen that so many times in different, like Doctor Who. kind of does a riff on that, where you're opening a place that's like it's bigger on the inside, and then you teleport or time travel to another place, you open his door and you're there. So it's yeah. So again, there's like these supernatural concepts like vampires and just magic, but the technology is what's so advanced, that Arthur C. Clarke, sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So it's like, yeah, the Dreeghs could have the technology to kind of open a door in a room in a hotel, and you boom, the ship's on the other side, even though it's underneath the building. Yeah, so that again, yeah, it's really these concepts like, oh, that's cool, but it's like he's wrapped it up in this really kind of weird story that doesn't do those ideas justice in a lot of ways. Yeah. But again, it was 1942 he's writing this, so it's
I
interesting that he
think
was
I
ahead of the
think
time for all.
I think it's I guess Robert had the right of it, which is that the the best thing about Van Vogt are the ideas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Here's my suggestion: somebody goes back in time, who's a decent writer, and he goes to Van
Decent,
Vogt and
no,
he says, "Listen,
no,
I'll
no,
pay
no.
you
Van
for all
Vogt,
your stupid
Van Vogt,
ideas."
no. Van Vogt doesn't need a
Huh?
writer. He needs an editor.
Nah, man,
Don't
an
we all?
editor couldn't save this fucking pile of garbage. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
hey.
There's nothing.
Oh, but
There's literally the only way Asylum could be bettered is rewritten. That's the way I see it. Because there's just so many. Like, if you are looking at this from a critical point of view, and you're not looking at it like, oh, well, what kind of experience this could give me, like, what are his ideas and so forth. If you're just looking at the level of prose comparatively to all the other people who are in the process of being published in astonishing science and weird tales at a time, this is ridiculous that it's been published, in my opinion.
yeah, but I mean, is it like when another author years later takes one of your concepts and writes it and
Yeah.
maybe does a better job? Maybe that's that does happen.
Well, they
It's not like
do they do
yeah.
say that flattery is the sincerest form of imitation is the sincerest
Other way.
form of flattery. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Oh boy.
if somebody likes the idea enough to take it and run off with it, I think that's like a heads off in a way. So I mean,
All right.
like I
Shoot.
said, I don't enjoy the story, but I also know this is not the story for me. I'll go back to what I said. I'm not the.
I don't know, Robert, do you have any other closing thoughts or idea for us as someone who probably enjoyed the story way more than most of us did?
Uh, I think perhaps maybe you three are a bit jaded. You've seen it all, and you've lived so long and all that.
Or being attacked here.
Or maybe you are just a nostalgic old man, Robert. Maybe that's also the case.
Hey.
Well, yes, that's true enough. But if being a nostalgic old man makes the difference between being able to enjoy a story and not, then that's a desirable state.
Dude,
to be in.
straight up, I would be on your like, if I could enjoy it, I would. There's not it's not the idea that I didn't want to like it. I like Vogt as a concept maker. And I definitely find the beginning exciting. Like, oh, we're in a spaceship. This guy is weird. And he might wake up this woman, but he might not. Because she might kill him. Whoa, what? What's happening? What's going on? Tell me now. And then it kind of like goes nowhere.
Yeah,
Mm.
I mean,
But that's the
even,
that's the thing.
Even the idea that there are actually humans scattered around throughout the whole galaxy, and that Earth, as we know it, is actually a backwater. There's a lot of things to be explored there, but yeah, we didn't really push too far into that.
One thing I will say that's nothing to do with concepts about the story that was positive. I think the last sequence where our protagonist is freaking out is well written. If there wasn't like 6 other freakouts beforehand, it would strike really hard. But I mean, because of that, it didn't. But just looking at that sequence in isolation, it also was written well. I feel.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Yeah, he had these moments of great, description and that kind of rose above, and you're like, oh, stay up here, stay in this level of excellence. And then it kind of dropped back down into like these
I see.
adverb heavy, like contrived moments. Like, yeah, I
All
hate to
right.
harp on the adverbs, but
The
yeah,
the
it's
adverbs.
yeah, it rose to moments of greatness, and then I think it just plummeted, kept plummeting back. It was like a roller coaster ride of like, yes, this is
You,
great. Oh
you,
wait,
you,
now it's not.
you know the really funny thing is when I was reading the story, I just kept thinking back to the slight disagreement I had with Robert, way back when we were talking about Stephen King's advice on writing, which is don't use adverbs.
Yeah, on writing. On writing. The whole yeah, I love that book, and you're right. Like that's part of it. Was reading that book was seminal for me as a writer. Was like, okay, yeah, the fixation on the adverbs
And
and
I
like
recall Robert saying, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to put words into your mouth, that adverbs is a rich part of the English language, and not using it is missing out on on the complexity of the language.
just
I
a
can't
light
remember
dab,
seeing.
just like too much salt is bad for you, too much of a good thing. It lightly sprinkle with, a little bit of profanity, a little bit of adverbs, a little bit, you want to sprinkle it just a touch of adverbs is fine. And listen, Stephen King writes, I've read a lot of Stephen King stuff. He uses adverbs
Yeah.
fairly frequently, not too frequently, but yeah, so he does it. So he doesn't eliminate all of them, but it's just like a little flavoring was nice. But when you're just boom, again, that's I think adverbs are a part of telling, right?
I
Rather than
have
showing. So
I have a metaphor that I think explains writing very well. It has nothing to do with the ingredients, but it has everything to do with the ingredients. Just like cooking. Cooking has nothing to do with the ingredients that you put in there, but it has everything to do with the ingredients you put in there. And the ones you don't put are sometimes one of the most important ones, right? So it's like the style of a cook is similar to the style of an author. However, they use the ingredients and what they do with them and how exactly they cook it, that's where the flavor really comes from. And not just, like saying to somebody, remove all your adverbs and now your prose will be great. That's not how it works. It's not a mathematical, I don't know, what's it called? You can't write a mathematical equation on good writing, I don't think.
So two things. One, being an amateur cook, is actually not about the ingredients. It's about heat and the application of heat. Two, I think, and this is actually the little bit of disagreement I had with Robert. I think he probably forgot all about it. It's so long ago, and that is, if you stop using adverbs in your sentences, what you find is you are forced to use different ways to describe the actions, because adverbs are like a short form. And so, like, if you use let's say surprisingly in your sentence, and if you stop yourself from using surprisingly, now you have to find a different way to express surprisingly. And sometimes the easy way is to just use 2 or 3 words to describe surprising. But other times, what happens is you find yourself having to rewrite the entire sentence in a different way. So that is that actually is really good for exercising the brain up, the muscle up here.
right.
If
I mean, if you
if
say
cooking
you can write a
if cooking is
sentence that
hold on,
says
hold on. If cooking is all about heat, what do you do with salads?
No heat,
You don't cook it.
you don't
that's
cook
why
it.
salads suck. That's why salads suck. 'Cause
I
there's
mean,
no heat.
some dishes are great cold, and what you do is you take the heat out, right?
This
Ice
is
cream.
literally my metaphor, but with heat.
Whoa.
This is it.
I was just being pedantic, but the way I would the metaphor I would use is actually in art shading. Like every beginner artist, after they draw their shape, they immediately go to shading, regardless of how bad the actual shapes are, because shading is a gimmick. It makes the thing look nicer than it actually is. But if you just do the shading right, immediately after you draw your shape, you are putting decoration on a bad foundation. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, you can write the sentence. Suddenly a crossbow bolt hit him, flew out of nowhere, or you could say he didn't notice the crossbow bolt until it slammed into his chest. It's
Yeah.
like the second way is a little more dramatic. You have to think more, you have to craft more. So it's that crafting time. It takes longer, it can take longer, it takes more craft to show and not tell. Telling is to use the adverbs and just to tell people what happens is the shortcut, is a writing shortcut. It's more workmanlike. Whereas if you're building drama and but yeah,
I mean,
I don't know.
it's like, again, I go back to the art analogy. It's like, if your knowledge of anatomy isn't that great, you draw a figure and then you start shading it. It's not going to change the fact that your female is basically a man with boobs. Like a lot of beginner artists make that mistake. They just draw a man and then they put two round things at the chest and call it a woman.
Okay.
Women have very different anatomy to men.
They also have butts. Okay, I'm sorry.
I mean,
That was
it's
awful.
yes. Well, I mean, that's a whole. That's it's not just.
I will be put on a pyre for that one.
It's
Sorry,
not.
go on.
It's not just the two most visible stuff. It's like the hips are in a different place. It's like
course,
the
of course.
the hips are lower. The elbows are lower. Like the navel is at not the same place. Like. There's a whole bunch of it. Like the proportions are completely different. So
This conversation has become a fever dream, like Van Vogt. Are we gonna Van Vogt?
Yeah, I don't know where we're at.
But
Okay, yes,
Exchange,
Robert.
Raised an interesting point that, as far as character is concerned as well, a lot of writers nowadays think, oh, I must have more female characters. So they just call their characters women. But, functionally,
they're men. Yeah.
they're men, yeah. No difference except for the name.
Yeah.
And as a man, I find that offensive.
I mean, like I feel that is a very challenging thing to do, because I tend not to write a lot of female characters in my own stories, mostly because I'm not up to the challenge of actually accurately portraying a female. I find.
Same here.
I love writing female characters, but that's probably because most of my life I've spent being around women mostly, rather than men.
Yeah, your family sounds like really cool bunch to be joking around with, to be honest.
Yeah, unless you have to do it 365 days a year. Yeah, for 2 hours it's great, I'm sure. All right, let's get to our final scores for the story by Van Vogt. Asylum. I give it. I can't make myself give it more than 3 out of 10. I really want to, but I can't. 3 out of 10 is what I can give it. It has fascinating concepts. There's 3 of them: space vampires, IQ being a galactic measurement, and in the conglomerate of individuals that are
The Galactic Observers.
the galactic observers and whatever. Those three concepts are interesting, and those are my 3 points out of 10 that it gets. Everything else is terrible.
All right. Well, Anthony, what's your score?
I kept using the term ambivalence. I was ambivalent about things, so I'm going to give this a 5 out of 10. I'm going to go right down the middle.
Right down the
I'm gonna
middle.
go
Exactly what ambivalent means.
Yes, I was ambivalent, so I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10 because, again, I loved some of the description. I think it rose to some great potential. It introduced, again, as we've all been saying, some great concepts that were echoed down through sci-fi from that point on. But it was just too stilted in places. Some hinky things from early 20th century ideology came creeping in. Too much of the gangster speak, like I said, like, yeah, Shane, like it was too much kind of like, hold on there, you dame, So it was just that kind of dragged me out of it. So yeah, it's for my ambivalence, it's 5 out of 10.
Robert.
I would give it an 8 out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a very
Well, that's pretty low.
For Robert.
No, a very good story, but not his best, but very good.
I'm gonna give it a very solid, not for me, out of 10. Someone else might
translate.
enjoy it. Someone else would probably
Wow.
enjoy it. Yeah. I mean,
No number, huh?
yeah.
Not even, it doesn't even rate a number.
Honestly, like I just can't get over the fact that there are a certain demographic of readers out there that would really enjoy this story.
Okay.
But I'm not one of them.
It's like when your teacher feels so bad for you, like whatever you gave to them, like the essay was so shit that they're like, you know what, I will give you a week. I'll just be like, just redo this. Just redo, like I've been there. Just redo this. That's the vibe I'm getting from XJ. He's just like, I can't believe that a human being has created this, so I'll just not say anything about it.
All right. Well, it was a extremely enjoying conversation, not about Asylum, but about the other stuff. I gotta say that is my honest feeling about this podcast. And if any one of you guys out there listening to the podcast enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. Help us grow the channel so we can do other stories. And have a great Thanksgiving for all you Canadians out there.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Happy Canadian Thanksgiving.